Afternoon, everyone. I was hoping more people would have joined us by now.
Good
Um,
afternoon.
I am going to go ahead because we're not going to go immediately into the activity. We are going to have a session about advocacy first. In the first hour, we will cover advocacy and health communication. And then in the second hour, we will take that time to do the in-class assessment, which you will be graded on. It's group work. So I am hoping that by that time, more persons will join since this activity actually contributes to your grade for this course. All right. So as mentioned, we're going to just briefly look at advocacy um, as today's topic before we get into the activity. So advocacy. Maybe I should start by asking you what comes to mind. But before you answer, I want to just share a quote with you from former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan. And that quote says, when you see something that's wrong, no matter how big the problem is, think, who else would like to change this? And how can we work together? That quote is directly related to advocacy. So I want to hear from you in our local context, whether Jamaican context or wherever in the world you are from. What comes to mind when you hear advocacy?
Speaking up for someone.
Mm-hmm. Speaking up for someone, yeah. Anybody else?
Representing the interest of others. Um,
Mm-hmm.
in some instances, they might not be able to do so, so that the outcome would be fair.
Yeah. So it's both of you are correct, speaking up for someone or representing the interests of others, especially those that may not be able to represent themselves or represent themselves adequately in order to get the kind of response or change that is needed. So yes, you're absolutely right. Um, so it's both, this is now the official definitions. Advocacy is both a science and an art. Um, and somebody mentioned speaking up for others. In this case, you can also consider causes or different issues that may be affecting the population or a group of people. So advocacy is also a part or a process in representing or acting on behalf of individuals or a cause. Um, there are such things as advocacy campaigns. This is now when you get more targeted, right? You are trying to now get as much attention that you can gather for the cause in order to have some kind of change, whether it's a policy change, whether you want laws to be changed, or you want standards to be put in place. And then you might need an advocacy campaign in order to increase the level of attention or the support that you can get for your cause. So usually for doing the campaign, we want to build support and we want to influence others to support it because just think about when you hear people are doing petitions and they send around petitions for people to sign, and the more they have a quota to meet in order for them to get the attention of whichever policymaker they're trying to reach. So in advocacy, you're also trying to get people to rally for the same cause that you're rallying. These slides are taking very long. All right, so advocacy, I heard speaking up before. It's right here again. It's speaking up. It's drawing attention to an issue. Likely you're trying to get the attention of the decision makers, and you're also working with other people to have these changes. And this, you can see the references there. There's a handbook on advocacy for women leaders. I'll probably find some readings from that I can share. So it's a process. So one protest alone isn't considered an entire advocacy movement or campaign. It is a part of it. It's a contributor, right? It's not a series of events, right? But it's a set of strategies, right? So you sit and you develop your advocacy plan. What are the things that you're going to try and do to get the attention, to get the changes made, or to get some kind of action, right? So it's not just a series of events. It's definitely not just a public relations campaign. So you see ads and you think, okay, this is an advocacy effort. It can include public relation, but public relation by itself is not advocacy. It's not a political campaign, and it's also not a tool for education. Now, let us do a quick matching of these, right? So based on what I just said, let's talk about this. So on the left of the screen, you have some, I don't want to say scenarios, examples of activities. There are some activities. And I want you to tell me whether could be considered advocacy, health education, public relations, or a political campaign or campaigning. So the first one that I will mention, a health fair where brochures are distributed.
Health
Now
education.
you're saying that is? And
Health
remember, okay,
education.
let me
Health
put the
education.
disclaimer. Think carefully because you can only use each option once. All right, so let me read them all first. So, a health fair where brochures are distributed, a radio interview that's calling for a policy change, a social media campaign that's naming particular ministers or one minister, a community workshop on nutrition. Now, let's start again with health fair distributing brochures. And I heard health education. That?
Yeah, I said that, but no, I'm just reassessing my options.
Okay. So this is match. Like when you're in school, primary school, and you have to draw the line from
Yes.
one side to match. Just imagine that that's what you're doing. There are four examples of activities and four labels, four boxes you could put them in. So let me hear what you're thinking now. You don't have to go in order. If somebody wants to pick out one and match it, just go ahead. So if anybody wants to talk about the radio interview or the social media campaign with the minister or a workshop on nutrition, just name them because sometimes we have to do process of elimination. Not true.
True.
The social media campaign naming a specific minister looks more politically campaigning.
Yes, that one is very obvious, right?
Yeah, that one is obvious.
And the radio
Yes.
interview calling for policy change, that more look like advocacy.
Yes, yes, yes. So you're both right. The social media campaign with the minister is very often a political campaigning strategy because, they're going to make it look like they're doing wonderful work on this issue. But it's really just so that you can remember that any time to come to vote.
And the
Community
community
workshop
vote,
on nutrition will be health education.
I think it could be public relations too. That
The
one could be.
workshop?
Yes.
No, man. The
I
health
think it's
fair would
health
be
education.
PR.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to give the nutrition one to health education because if it's a whole workshop, usually you're trying to convince people of something, right? You're
Yeah.
trying to build their knowledge, you're trying to convince them to adopt certain behaviors or practices, what kind of foods to avoid if you have certain health issues or so we're gonna call the nutrition workshop, health education, the social media, political campaigning. Somebody said the radio interview.
Was advocacy.
Uh-huh. Why you think so?
Because you're calling for a policy change, meaning you're working or championing for a cause
Mm-hmm.
or a
Yeah.
specific issue.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is advocacy. And so I know it's hard for you to think the health fair with the brochures is PR, not true? Because it sounds like health education, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
It's just by itself, distributing the brochures isn't health education per se, um, because you're not reading it to them. You don't know if they have read it. How do you know that the education aspect did occur? A lot of times, don't we? We're all guilty of just accepting a pamphlet or a brochure or a flyer just because somebody handed it to us, right? So in its strictest sense, we wouldn't call it health education because for health education, we are not just handing something, but we are delivering information, instruction, trying to incite some kind of change, as opposed to just giving access or letting people know that this is available for you to read at your will, right? So that one I knew would have been a little bit tricky. But the important thing is that we could clearly see which one of these would have aligned seamlessly into advocacy. All right, so advocacy, we know, is clearly tied to health promotion. In certain instances, we're going to talk about examples of that. But usually we advocate for, and I think Veronica said it when she said that in terms of speaking up for the interests of others. And in a lot of times, well, that is representational, especially for groups who may not feel like they have a voice or that their voice is being heard. When we see certain injustices, we are moved or we feel compelled to represent the interests of those persons, right? There's another one in terms of the empowerment of the disadvantaged. So facilitational. In this instance now, we try to build the capacity or the ability of individuals to speak up for themselves, right? And knowing HIV, and I think in other issues, there's this quote, nothing for us without us, right? So we want to be at the table ourselves. People with disability just want somebody to speak for them. We want you to see us and hear us And we want to tell you exactly what is affecting us and what we need. So in that instance, you may be building persons' capacities in order. So that's why it's called facilitating, in order for them to speak for themselves. HP, there is health promotion, right? So advocacy in health promotion addresses health inequalities. Now, some examples of some very popular advocacy movements, women's rights. That one is very popular, the CEDAW Convention. Well, CEDAW, but some of you who might not remember, because I keep having to remind myself, I know what it is, but in terms of the acronym, so it's Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, right? So that was one big advocacy movement that spoke up for women's rights, rights to whether vote, have leadership position, be represented in education, whatever it is in terms of discriminatory actions against women. That convention was, and that a lot of countries signed onto that as well. Then we have advocacy efforts for workers' rights. And one of the most influential organizations that is tasked with that is the ILO, International Labor Organization, and they primarily address issues around workers' rights. Which organization in Jamaica focuses on workers' rights? This is a question for you, you know. Who advocates for workers' rights in Jamaica?
Thing is
Trade
supposed to
union,
Yes, trade unions. And which government body?
Ministry of Labor,
Aha, yes. So there are several trade unions that represent workers. And then you also have the Ministry of Labor for those who may not be represented by a union. And there are so many because when you think about it, I know there's one for domestic workers. There's several of them, but in terms of workers' rights, there obviously was a need to speak up for workers because in instances they may be exploited or taken advantage of by their employers. World Health Organization, a big one was the tobacco control initiatives, because of the recognition of the harmful effects of tobacco and how widespread the poor health outcomes were. And so that was a big, big, big deal and still is in Jamaica. And then, of course, HIV, as UNAIDS and PANCAP and different AIDS committees across the world, as well as in Jamaica. And they were primarily focused on reducing stigma and discrimination because the issues around stigma and discrimination would have caused people to be isolated, left out, not treated fairly in the workplace, or not being employed because of their status. And there were even workplaces who would have asked for people's HIV test results, even though their status would have had no influence on their ability to carry out their tasks. So those are just some of the organizations that we're most familiar with, some of the most popular ones. Now, I want you now to list examples of advocacy groups and their work in your country. So we mentioned some a while ago, but there are more, as I said, and I want you to tell me some that you can think of.
Jamaicans for Justice.
I know that's a very popular one, and tell me about their work.
And so they would have been advocating for the rights, the human rights of persons within the society in terms of the rights given to them by the constitutions and the breaches and so on. Um, uh, they usually focus on like police shootings that are not justified or the rights the rights and freedoms of persons in general.
Mm-hmm.
When we had the um enhanced security measures or the ooh
The
when we have
Zozo.
the those right,
Mm-hmm.
those things when the rights are just people are just being scraped up and not
Mm-hmm.
charged and just locked up for weeks at a time, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Right.
Yes. All right. So can somebody list another group? Who else advocates?
The Jamaica Environment Trust.
Uh-huh.
They look
Jets.
at environmental policy and actions and all about the conservation, preservation of the environment and Jamaica's
Mm-hmm.
overall natural resources.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Can we think of any other one?
I think the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal group. I think they kind of operate like a advocacy group in terms of the intention of their work would seem to be to get more. You see, like how we are concerned with health literacy, they're
Mm-hmm.
like concerned with parliamentary literacy, so that
Mm-hmm.
when we have these regulations and laws and so on coming out of parliament, their work is to one ensure that people are aware that these different things are coming out, that we understand, and where therefore the public can have a stronger voice in what those laws ultimately look like.
Mm-hmm.
Is the sense I've got. I would need to do a little bit more work, but I've heard some interviews from the some of the principals there, and that would seem to be their concern.
Yes. Yes. I I believe that is what it mostly entails.
You have
Veronica, you
you
want?
have
Mm-hmm.
I think you have J flag that
Mm-hmm.
represents the rights of the wait a minute, LBG or something, the
Mm-hmm.
PQ
Mm-hmm.
community in terms of discrimination, whether it be when accessing services or their rights to privacy and whatever it is that they do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So we've named a few. Can you tell me some of the strategies that you've observed? What are some of the ways in which they advocate?
Through education and counseling.
Which ones do that?
Well, I know of like the Women's Center, they would actually try and because they cater to adolescent mothers, so they
Mm-hmm.
would assist with integrating them back into school, offering counseling support and education. So that one I know of.
Okay. And what do they advocate for?
But, it would be just ensuring the rights of the adolescent mothers to be
Mm,
integrated back and to be educated and also to care for provide support for their children. And also in the case where it's an underage pregnancy, if it's not
mm,
consensual, I think to provide some support or intervention in that regard.
okay. This brings me to another question. Can a government body advocate? I want you all to weigh in. Can the government advocate? What do you think? Or should they?
Um, in oh, there's some, there is this reparations. We had I think it was Mike Henry at that time, not remembering which ministry it was at that time, that he advocated for Jamaica to get reparations from the countries
Oh,
that colonized us.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, but who he was trying to reach was not the Jamaican government, right?
Correct, correct.
Yeah, because that is the question is if the government advocate, because usually you're trying to advocate to get the attention of the government, right? It's the policymakers, the leaders, the decision makers that you're trying to reach. So if you're the policymaker and the decision maker, can you advocate to yourself? Hmm. Because very often what we see is that, or what the norm is that advocacy is often done by civil society, an NGO, a community, a group of people that come together. So there may be instances where, and I'm just thinking about this because of the Women's Center issue. So I think the Women's Center would have come about because of advocacy, because um, girls who became pregnant during their school years very often would be disadvantaged education-wise and would less likely, or or should I say, would be more likely to have poor social outcomes in terms of completing their education, being gainfully employed, and being able to support themselves and their children financially. And so, of course, they would have been a vulnerable or marginalized group that would need some kind of advocacy. So I think it's not that they necessarily advocate. Well, yes, they will speak up and say, do not treat or do not discriminate or stigmatize against the young women, because that happens quite a bit. But in terms of getting policies changed, I think that's how they would have come about in terms of continuing education for the young women, as well as reintegration once they've had their children or their babies, they are to complete their education, both at the facility or depending on where they are in their education to continue after. But yes, we were talking about the strategies though. What are some other things people do in
But
Jamaica for
Miss,
advocacy?
Miss, before you move on, the
Mm-hmm.
I was watching the news, and Dayton Campbell came on, and he was representing or advocating for the persons in Westmoreland as it relates to power. Where would you place that? Because this was a government minister lobbying for the persons that he represented within his constituency. Where would you put that?
Well, is that really advocacy? Or is he, because advocacy in terms of, let's see, he's not necessarily trying to he wants action for sure. So in the tier of advocacy, that would probably be not very high because they would have already had normal access. It was a hurricane. It was not normal circumstances under which. So if, for example, let me give you another example. There are communities that have never had water for the last 30 years, right? And there is no real explanation as to why. Forgotten communities. However, in the case where there is a natural disaster and there are possible things beyond my technical knowledge why the electricity hasn't been restored, is it more political? Remember when we were talking about what is political campaigning versus advocacy? So he is representing. So there are traces or it does resemble advocacy, but is this community really a vulnerable or marginalized group and they're being forgotten for that reason? Or is it a technical issue and a resource issue? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it can get a little blurry, but you have to also look at varying lenses as what is the cause? Why is this happening? Is it a political issue? Is it really a marginalized group who are forgotten? Or is it that the magnitude of the problem is so great that it's taking a lot longer and it has nothing to do with whether the people are rich or poor or disabled or criminals or whatever, right? Hope that sheds some light on it. But in its truest sense, when you're doing advocacy, as we looked at the definitions before, you're trying to make some shift in policies, in rights of individuals, in getting changes in legislation, representing, speaking up for the disadvantaged. All right, let us continue. Okay, so these are just some snippets of advocacy groups. So we have up here JAN, they advocate for young people. Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, they have advocacy in their name. We have Office of the Children's Advocate, who advocate for the rights of children. We have mental health advocates. We have trans rights advocates, Heart Foundation, and we've spoken a lot about their campaigns. They're advocating for sugar sweetened beverages to be whether taxed. I think that's one of what they're requesting for an increased or for a tax specific to sugar sweetened beverages, as well as for certain thresholds not to be allowed in schools. And then we have JN Plus advocating for people living with HIV. So does Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. And Women's Media Watch advocates for women and how women are represented in society and in the media. Some of the strategies, we didn't talk about that much. I moved on, right? So we see protests sometimes, right? And I think when I asked for examples of advocacy groups, the first one that came out was Jamaicans for Justice, and that is probably also because they're very visible. They are very often, they're very, very vocal, very much in the news very often. They are visible on the streets, they're on the radio, they're on social media, so they're very active. And so those are some of the methods in which they advocate, right? There are different approaches. And different methods, and depends on who you're trying to influence, whether it's a local small community or you're trying to go nationally. You want to advocate, you want to influence the Jamaican government. Or, like somebody mentioned with reparations, you're going internationally, right? Now, some of the things you might be asking when you're deciding who you're trying to reach is who the decision makers are, right? Who decides what should be and what should not be, what will be decided on, and how the decisions are made, right? So who decides, whether it's policymakers, judges, ministers, boards? We're familiar with all of these. If we've been in the health system long enough, we know how these decisions are made. Well, we know who makes these decisions. How are the decisions made? You hear, okay, well, this is what the policy says. The policy says that, or the law says that we cannot or we should not be providing contraceptives to minors or any commodities to minors without without reporting it to the Children's Registry, right? That's what the Child Protection Act states. It doesn't say that you can't give them. It just says that in their best interest, you can. However, it has to be reported so that SESOCA can do an investigation to see if this young person is in danger, right? And so some of these decisions either become, or in this case, remember when we were talking about Women's Center, it's there. Some of it can be, let us decide to have an institution that caters to young girls who are withdrawn from formal, regular high school, but we still want them to continue their education. And so we will develop an institution where they're able to do so without having their education disrupted and whatever influence have on their former school, right? How it is decided? Well, usually, or how it is supposed to go, is that there should be consultations. The citizens should be able to have a voice, state their opinion, play a role in what is decided. Their feedback should be considered. They should have access to all of the information to help them to make that decision. And so they should be consulted in the process of making these policies or changing these laws. Key approaches, so there's some that involve leaders. Building partnerships is also important. Mobilizing community groups, building the capacity, especially of those that are vulnerable, who it is best for them to be able to represent themselves and speak on their own behalf, and also working with the media. And as we mentioned, some advocacy groups are a lot more popular than others. And this is largely because they know how to massage or work with the media. They know how to create news. That means they have to build some kind of excitement because news really they're after what's going to increase their listenership or their viewing audience. And so some advocacy groups know exactly how to play the game to ensure that they are in the media so that more people can hear their voices, hear their causes, and join in on their efforts. Now, let me see the time. Okay. Usually, for the advocacy process, there's an issue, there's something that we want to change. And so we have to develop a goal statement. And in this goal statement, typically it's a statement on what it is that you hope to achieve based on your advocacy efforts, right? Your objectives are the different steps and the processes that will be included or that you will be taking to achieve your goal. Your audience. Now, who are you trying to influence? Are you trying to influence your MP or the minister or parliament or whomever, right? Those or even your employers. We spoke about groups that were instrumental in advocacy for laborers or employees. So who is it that you're trying to reach? That would be your target audience. Building alliance and support is always critical in terms of getting your issue on the agenda and getting your issue at the forefront of people's minds so that people recognize that it is important and support you. In your developing your messages, you have to, as we recall from previous sessions, bear in mind your target audience. So there's one message for the minister, and it may be different from your community members that you're trying to get on board, right? It has to be tailored for different audiences, and it must also describe what your solution is that you're looking for and how you intend to get to those solutions. Your communication channels, we've spoken about channels over and over. These are your opportunities for engagement and publicity. So your radio, your TV, your flyers, your press conferences, all of those are the communication challenges. Now, media is important. So it's important to establish those relationships because this is where you're going to get your publicity. If you're advocating and nobody else knows about it, just your small group, then you're not likely to be as effective as if you would be having more public attention and being in the media. You can also write letters, even letters to the editor. You'll see them sometimes in the newspaper. Going to high profile events. This is invitations, but sometimes you have to invite yourself and hope not to get kicked out because if you have a reputation of being an advocate, especially around a topic that they may not want to address, you probably would not get invited. Site visits, those would be for more international advocacy. Interviews with high profile people. The higher the profile of the people you have on your team, again, that is more likely to increase your visibility, and staying relevant and up to date with your information also helps to get you attention. Okay, now we often don't talk about the money part, but how else are you going to be able to? How far do you expect to get with your advocacy effort if you don't have the financial resources? So fundraisers are, you will hear that we're going to have a 5K walk or run, or we're going to have a benefit concert or a play, whatever it is, because you may have to put out some ads. You may have to put up some signs. If you're having a protest, sometimes you have to account for transportation. Advocacy is not free. It looks free because you figure people just show up and voice their opinions, or they go on the radio, but it is a much larger machinery than that, because if you look at JFJ, for example, they are an advocacy organization, and so they need staff. If advocacy is your full-time job, you need staff and you need to be able to pay them. So you might have volunteers, but you do need equipment for those letters that you're going to be writing and sending out. You're going to need to have a computer, printer, whatever else, phone bill, transportation costs, all those things. And so therefore, you will need to raise funds. Data is important because this is where you're going to get your information. So you're not just advocating on a whim or an idea, but you have the facts to support the cause that you are backing. Yes, and well, implementation is what it says, according to your plan, how you are going to carry out those activities, the stages and the steps that you're going to be taking in order to fulfill those action plans. And in almost everything we do, we must have an M&E component, right? Similar to when we are planning our health communication interventions and activities and campaigns, the reasons for monitoring are the same, right? We want to be able to ensure that we are making the best decisions, that we're doing it most efficiently, and that we are seeing the changes that we intended. How do we know we are achieving those objectives that we set out? The only way to tell is if we're monitoring it. And how do we know if we should continue or if there are changes to be made in our strategies, then we have to evaluate. So we look at what we've done, see if they've been successful, where the weak areas are that we may need to improve on. The difference, monitoring, continuous, you're always tracking, you're assessing as you go along. With evaluation, these are you usually have mile markers or timelines. So it could be periodic, whether it's quarterly, annually, biannually. It's more in-depth because you're now comparing what your objectives are and what your outcomes are in order to see whether or not you have achieved those. And of course, it helps you to plan for the future based on what your results or your outcomes would be. Why we evaluate, of course, to improve our designs, right? We also want to make the judgments about the effectiveness and to know what lessons have we learned, because even if all your strategies were not successful, how can you do things differently the next time around? What have you learned from this approach and from this method? And we're going to be closing off with the same quote that we started with from Kofi Annan. When you see something that's wrong, no matter how big the problem is, think, who else would like to change this? And how can we work together? And that essentially is the basis or the background of advocacy, right? So advocacy is not an event. Well, it's not a single event, it's a process. And it's not just public relations. So just sending out media briefs is not advocacy in it by itself. Public relations is a function of advocacy, but just using elements of public relations is not the totality of your advocacy efforts. Build support, influence others, and also influence policies and legislation, right? And just as my two volunteers earlier said, advocacy considers vulnerable, protecting the vulnerable among us, as well as empowering or building the capacity or facilitating the needs and the abilities of the disadvantaged. You're going to get the presentations. I won't go through all of these because time. Yes, we were waiting on the late bugs. Yes, I called you late bugs because I wanted to start early because we're going to do our in-class assessment now. So I am going to, any questions? I've been doing all the talking because I've been trying to wrap this part up. Any questions or comments? All right. No, I am going to put in the chat. Wait, I have to first find the document. Where is it? Okay. So your activity is going to be very much geared on what you have covered already. Don't worry, it won't be based on what you're covering now. It will be based on what you have already covered, which is all about your theories and your message design and your communication planning. And so I'm going to just add now what the assignment is so that, let me just make sure I'm attaching the right thing. Okay, this is it. So I have attached it, so please, as soon as you are able, download it And I am going there. It's again group work. I'm going to put you in 2 groups. Group 1 will do, you will see there, the first assignment, case 1. And group 2 will do case 2. You have, I want to say, 45 minutes to complete it. All of the instructions are there. Your output from this, so we will have a discussion, but the tangible output is a 1-page document. So you need to assign somebody in your group that will be putting all of this information on a Word file or whatever it is, 1 page, no more, 1 page. Because we're going to be talking through it anyway, but the 1 page is for my records so that it will show that you did the assignment. So I am going to put you in groups now. So speak now if there are any questions or concerns. So Cindy, Denise, and Francine are in group 1. Veronica, Simone, and Petre are in group 2. So I'm opening the groups now, and you will start as soon as you get together.